Eric with his sick guitar riff off the top. I mean, look, you got 9 of them behind you as always. So
one fell off the wall, as you can see. Normally I have 5, but the one fell.
Of course.
I just laying on the couch one night and it just fell on my feet. It was terrifying.
That would happen. That would happen. All right, so folks, we got a really fun episode for you today. Bringing on a very good friend of mine who you'll recognize from TV, from Hockey Night in Canada and Sportsnet. And that is one of these two guys right here. No, I'm just kidding. It's the guy on the left. So, Kyle, you've seen this a million times. Rick Astley, we're never going to let you down, Kyle. We always want to entertain you. Okay, so before we bring him on, there's so many things I could say about him. But Kyle is a good friend of mine. For the first time appearing on the Deeks and Backer show here, we got a lot of stuff to cover. But we're going to talk specifically today about the NHL Draft, which is coming up this weekend. Kyle is going to be there in Montreal at the Bell Center, as you guys know. I'm pretty fired up about it for obvious reasons. And we're going to talk about the 2022 Stanley Cup Playoffs, which Kyle, of course, just covered. Seeing the Colorado Avalanche win their first Stanley Cup in 21 years, I want to say. Was it 21? I think it's 21. Yeah, Kyle's giving me the nod. So without further ado, though, let's not keep you guys waiting. This guy has a good sense of humor when he does his spiels for Sportsnet, with Gritty here, with Hamilton the Pig in Carolina, with one of the greatest players of a generation, with one of my favorite Montreal Canadiens here, a former Toronto Maple Leaf who just lifted the Stanley Cup, and of course Kyle is now, I guess, officially named the Canadian Tom Brady, according to Sir Charles Barkley. Kyle, forgive me for this image, but I had to put it up here. Anyway, let's bring him on. Kyle Bukauskas, ladies and gentlemen.
Why were my eyes so wide there? That's the one thing that haunts me. I'm like, I don't know why. I mean, I was quite amazed that I was standing next to Charles Barkley, but I don't know where the hell that came from. Anyway, but you came prepared, Drew, though. I will give that to you. That's great.
You must have been looking at a clip of his golf swing.
Yeah, right. Yes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Good stuff.
Either that or just, reliving, I don't know, one of the many intermissions with him and Shaq on the TNT panel that made your eyes go, did I just hear what I thought I heard? But yeah, that was a lot of fun. So appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah, of course. We got more. There's a few more images. And actually, you know what, Kyle, I got to tell you, my favorite, I stumbled upon this randomly when I was doing my own YouTube stuff myself. And this clip is probably my favorite from the Stanley Cup Playoffs. So I just got to run it here. And I think you'll know where it's coming from. Here it is.
Thought I could hear him.
Like, come on. I love that so much, man. I stumbled upon that, and you're singing all the small things. I loved it. I loved it.
Yeah, it was fun. I just thought, well, I mean, they were up big in that game, and it had become such a prominent part of like game night in Denver throughout their playoff run. I know they'd started it a couple years prior to this season. But of course, when you go on a long playoff run, stuff like that, starts to get a lot more attention outside of the local market. And so I remember like doing the first game there, the Western Conference final, and hearing it and just being blown away about like how neat it sounded with the entire crowd belting it out at the top of their lungs. And obviously it ratcheted it up a few knots come the Stanley Cup final. So it was one of those things where I just decided it was time to join the masses and see what all the hype was about. So thankfully it was a song I was familiar with. I will say though, and mind you, like I don't know how, I haven't gone and looked at the origin of like Sweet Caroline with the Boston Red Sox, like how that came to be there. I'm surprised. Like I mean, All the Small Things was like I guess a fairly popular song like for us growing up, like in its heyday. But like I don't know how many people would put that as like if you're thinking of like the top Blink-182 song, how many people would answer All the Small Things to that question? But anyway, it turns out to be a great arena anthem song, especially the television timeout of a hockey game.
Have you seen that yet? Like, have you seen that clip from is that the first time you've seen that or no? Because I feel like somebody else would have sent that to you by now.
Yeah. No, I mean, I saw it a couple of times just because afterwards, like. Our social group ran with it and pumped it out there. And then they had All the Small Things. That was the tease for the next game. Or no, it wouldn't have been the next game. It was good when Game 5 when we came back to Denver. And so they, inserted a little snippet of me in the crowd with that too. So I got it sent to me a couple of times there. So I had obviously live, you have no idea what it looks like. You're just enjoying the moment.
Chris Cuthbert thought he heard you, so I mean.
That's right. So I was singing loud enough then.
Well, that's fun stuff, man. Well, we're going to talk about the draft in a second, but let's just quickly talk about the Stanley Cup playoffs because from Kyle's point of view, as I put it here at the bottom, and I don't know where you want to start with this because we had such a great series with Eric is a Leafs fan, so he's gone through a lot and is still going through a lot. But that Tampa Leafs series, I don't know if you want to start with that one, whichever one you want to go with, but just talk about your experience covering these playoffs this year, Kyle.
Yeah, I mean, it was great to have what was as close to a normal playoffs we've had in the last 3 years. That was awesome, where it was full buildings every night, and just the hockey was really good. Like did we have 5 or 6 game sevens in the first round? So many tight contests just to start the playoffs. And, as John Cooper likes to say, like the first round is kind of like organized chaos and you're just kind of hoping and praying you get through it. And then things sort of settle in from that point onwards. But Toronto, Tampa, I thought was like a banger of a series. Great drama, good hockey. I thought the Leafs were right there. Like, of course, when they lose, the aftermath, there's all the dissecting of, well, they don't have this, so they're not good enough in this area. I mean, call me crazy. Like I was in high school when the Canucks were like at their peak of the Sedin Luongo era, and when they went to the final in 2011, and that came after finally getting through Chicago. Right, they'd played them the 2 years previous, lost both times, had a 3-0 series lead as President's Trophy winners. All of a sudden now they're in overtime in Game 7 at home, and it was one of those, if they had lost that game, then there were jobs on the line. Like there were going to be a lot of changes in that organization. But Alex Burrows scores, and then it was like they couldn't be stopped en route to the Stanley Cup final. I mean, ran into some injuries and just out of gas. The Bruins dragged it into the mud, and they came up short. But I kind of had that similar vibe with Toronto. Like if they'd just gotten not only past the first round, but by Tampa, if they were able to knock them off, like the rest of the way, unless they ran into what they would have, Colorado in the final, like there was no one else, at least in the East, where I thought, no, I don't really think they have a chance against them. Like I thought they totally could have gone on a run had they just got through Tampa, but they couldn't. So it was really quite fascinating, the 2 late goals in Game 6 in Tampa, and seemed to be in good shape. And then all of a sudden now they've got a lengthy 5-on-3 to kill, and Kucherov scores the tying goal there with their season on the line. Braden Point in overtime going back to Toronto, and it just felt like didn't feel the same as blowing the series lead against Montreal last year. He thought going home they still were in decent shape. Like it was a good Tampa team that you weren't going to be able to get through them easily. But Nick Paul of all people, like Sens fans, we're having a field day that night with him scoring 2 goals. It was a memorable series for sure, especially because the level is so high and the pace is so high in the first round because the energy's still up and you're not there aren't as many ice bags and bandages and guys nursing things as there are later on in the playoffs. So it was just really high quality hockey, but great drama, unfortunately for Leaf fans, with them coming out on the wrong side of it again. But I really believe they were right there. I mean, it was almost became a between the ears things of whatever that final hurdle to push yourself over to end a series when you have someone on the ropes. Like they just haven't found it yet.
My question, Eric, do you got one?
Yeah, well, no, first of all, thanks for making me feel really old by saying you were in high school when Longo's Dean era was in Vancouver.
Eric's older than he looks, but he looks good for his age, man.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought we graduated within a couple of years of each other.
No. I was long out of high school, even at the beginning of the 2000s. So, but yeah, no, I agree with mostly everything you said as far as that series goes. I don't know if Toronto would have had as easy a time as it seemed like Tampa did en route to the finals, just because I think a lot of teams have more belief against Toronto. Like there's that mentality amongst other teams that they're just, if they're the kind of team that if you put them on their heels, then you can do better. Like I think Florida would have put up a much better fight against Toronto than they did against Tampa. But one thing I did learn about Tampa is that they don't care about losing hockey games. I think you could see that all the way through the playoffs. Whenever it seemed like their back was against the wall or anything like that, they just, we're okay. We got more games in the series. We're good. And then they'd always come back and just start crushing again. And it was like, even in the finals, when it looked like, Colorado was in complete control, I thought to myself, I wouldn't count Tampa out yet. They really don't care about these losses. They shake them off so easily. Of course, Colorado ends up being just a bit too strong of a team for them. But, I was impressed with Tampa. And even John Cooper, I had some choice words for him throughout that whole thing because I wasn't a big fan of his pressers. I actually was curious your take on that. If you thought that was a strategy, or if you thought that maybe he was kind of a little arrogant about it, or maybe he just had that amount of faith in his team that every time they lost, he was comfortable saying, it was us that allowed them to win and we'll be fine next game,
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of all those things, Eric, because I mean, when you're the two-time defending champs, I guess there could be a little bit of arrogance behind you, but I wouldn't say there's certainly some swagger and confidence with how John conducts himself. And I mean, that comes with how long he's been around, like he's comfortable in his own skin and just his personality. Certainly a background as a lawyer, presents the ability to be pretty savvy behind a microphone and, use some wordsmanship when required. But I think he felt, I know he said to us in like our broadcaster chats more than once throughout that series, it was like, if we lose the series, we're going to be pissed off that we, let Toronto beat us. If Toronto loses, like they should be pissed off that they let us beat them, kind of thing. Because I think he felt certainly on his side, like they weren't at the level they needed to be probably until the third period of Game 6 and then on through. So like the last 4 periods of that series. When they started to take off, because I'm sure you remember the fact that they scored 3 goals or more in each of the first 6 games of the series against Andrei Vasilevsky. That just flat out hasn't happened the last 3 years over the course of their playoff success. So for them to be in that position, like they gave themselves a chance, and so I think for Tampa, like they've been through so much and in large part, it's been the same group, at least in terms of the core. There's been some changing pieces around the outside, right? Like you lose your third line after last season. That's significant. But the guys that are in charge, that run the room there, they were all still there. And so I think when, things got a little dicey, like down a goal going into the third period of Game 6 with your season on the line, I'm totally with you. Like I've got such a great deal of respect, and I've felt, so fortunate to have been able to cover a lot of their playoff games the last few years as they've won 2 Stanley Cups and come within 2 wins of winning a third in a row. Like they figured it out. Like they went through the hell of 2019 of being embarrassed in the grandest of ways, and now they're just a team that I remember. So if you remember the Florida series, Game 2. Kucherov makes the unreal play with 2.9 seconds left in the third period to Ross Colton. He scores what ended up being the game-winning goal. And, standing outside the room afterwards, waiting for our walk-off interview, like usually in those situations, like everyone comes in, right? The coach will come in, do his speech, and there's a big, effing rights, boys, back to Tampa we go. And there's a big celebration, especially A, it's the playoffs. B, like you just stole another one on the road, like great drama at the end. And so Cooper goes in, and then I see him leave, and it was just, maybe the walls were soundproof, but it was utter silence in there. There was no feeling of hey, this is a great moment for us. Internally, certainly they know the significance of taking 2 on the road, but as John Cooper likes to always say, we're not here to win a game, we're here to win a series. And it's just that single track focus at that time of year for them, where the moments along the way are great, and you need to have them in order to win. But ultimately, there's a goal way off in the distance that we're really focused on, and so that's where our mind is at, and everything kind of along the way. It's just part of the process, and they don't let themselves get too wound up with it, whether it goes well for them or it doesn't. And we saw that again on display throughout this run. And then I think they just ran into a better team in Colorado that ultimately they felt like it was their time, and they made sure that they capitalized on it.
Yeah, that was I think you really hit the nail on the head with saying that was the far away focus is something we haven't seen in the past years. Like when you're going for your first run or your second run, it could be a little bit more rah, but now you have this expectation, you know how to win, and you're just, it's just one game after another. And it really worked out well for them, because I don't think that they were as strong a team going in this season as they were in previous 2 seasons. And to make a run as far as they did, just knowing that they were good enough and that their team knew how to win as a team, it definitely paid dividends. A lot of teams can learn a lot from how they handled these playoffs.
Yeah, and certainly how they're built, and roster construction too, and asset management as well. Like, I mean, how about the other day, Ryan McDonagh being traded to Nashville? An aging defenseman who, like, I'm not convinced. Like, they talk about all the moves that they have made over the last few years, and certainly it's like a product of all of those things put together, which is why they were able to win 2 in a row and be really close again this year. But I don't think they win any of those if they don't make the move for Ryan McDonagh in 2018 at the trade deadline that season. He was such a workhorse for them, and like the stories of the shots that he blocked and the damage that it did, and the fact that there was little to no time missed, unbelievable. And the person he is, I think, in the locker room, there's a lot of respect there as well. Like, just the perfect quintessential, minute eater, quality person, quiet leader, but can still give you good minutes on the ice. And all of a sudden, like, they trade him. But clearly, Julian Breezeball looked at, wanting to free up some cash to move elsewhere, and perhaps looking at, the guys, I think he's 33 years old now. How many more of those good years does he conceivably see him having, and perhaps trying to get out in front of it and trying to get a little bit younger and keeping themselves in a position where they can try to maybe go for 3 cups in 4 years. Ultimately, they felt that was best. So, it really is remarkable with just in terms of how they think, both as a group, a coaching staff, a front office, even ownership. I think they're on a different level compared to a lot of other organizations around the league. Julian Breezeball has a lot of respect amongst other GMs in the NHL, and you see why. They've been one of the teams that's constantly in the mix in the playoffs, and not just one and dones, more often than not.
Well, before we jump into the draft, Kyle, I think I just want to ask you about these Colorado Avalanche, because
I guess we should talk about the champs here.
Spent a lot of time talking about the losers.
Yeah, I'm like, I can't reach my imitation Stanley Cup from here, but yeah, the guys who won that thing over there. But yeah, what can you say about their run? And you interview, we talk about what you actually do for Hockey in Canada, but like, you interview all these players that actually get to experience the euphoria of lifting that cup over their heads. You're on the ice with them. Like, your vantage point is pretty unique. So just talk about the feeling of seeing these guys lift the cup, after all the hard work, and specifically how these Avalanche did it too.
Yeah, I mean, it is the best part of my role, no question, is being on the ice and being able to talk to players and members of the organization after winning a Stanley Cup. Like, there's really no cooler moment to be part of, and you see the emotion and the joy, like, up close and personal, is really, really special. I think they were a team that, again, similar to Toronto in that, it was the second round that they had issues getting by, instead of the first. And they knocked on the door a few times. They let a series against Vegas last year slip away. There's the infamous quote from Nathan McKinnon in the aftermath of that season. But I give Joe Sakic a lot of credit for a number of reasons. He had every reason to start to make some major changes after last year. But he believed in the group, and he stuck with the core in large part. Went out, made a deal to bring in Darcy Kemper to address the goaltending situation, and it ended up working out for him. I think of like Cale Makar, the way he emerged. I think he was just at a point in his career where he was a great defenseman almost right away. But he went to a completely different level in these playoffs. Like, I will say, I don't have a vote for any of the awards, but I was really fascinated by Roman Jossi's pursuit of 100 points as a defenseman, just because I thought, I would never see that in my lifetime. And the fact that he was that close, I kind of was thinking, he should really get some strong consideration for the Norris, and obviously he did. But watching Cale Makar operate throughout the postseason, it was like, man, there's no question who the best defenseman in the game is right now, in terms of just the electricity that he plays with. And, not to drag on too long here, but one of the stories I wanted to get in during the final, I just never got the chance to. Like his draft, the fact how he got to be Colorado's pick at number 4 is really quite fascinating, right? Because it's easy in hindsight to look back and go, of course they took Cale Makar 4th overall. Like, what a steal to get him at 4. The fact that he wasn't gone any of the 3 picks beforehand. But, as the story goes, he was playing in the Alberta Junior Leagues in Brooks. And so going into that season, he's actually the head of the amateur scouting staff now for Colorado, Wade Klippenstein. But going into that year, so the summer of 2016, he had just been hired by Colorado as an amateur scout. It was his first year as an amateur scout at the NHL level. Now, he lives just outside of Lethbridge, and he's about an hour and 10-minute drive door to door from his home in Lethbridge to where Cale Makar was playing with the Brooks Bandits of the AJHL. And so imagine like your first year as a scout in the NHL and like your first scouting meetings, whenever they have them, November, December, and they go, and he's going, yeah, there's this defenseman playing in the Alberta Junior Leagues I think we should really take a look at. Like, the rest of the room must have been going like, are you kidding me? Because it just hadn't happened before. Like, no kid out of that league had been taken that high. And you think about, that was a terrible year for Colorado, right? 48 points. They were last by a long shot. And thinking that they had a very good shot at drafting 1st overall, the draft lottery happens and they slip to 4th. So like, that was a gut punch for the organization, as if they're feeling like, could this season get any worse for us? They fall to 4th overall. And so I think over time, obviously a player doesn't get drafted just by, one guy making the decision. It's an organization that makes the selection. But it's certainly, really right up until I think draft week, I got the sense that there wasn't, a unanimous feeling that Cale Makar is our guy. Like, there was a lot of debate about, do we really take our first pick in that draft that high on a defenseman out of the Alberta Junior Leagues, because he had really come on late. Like, even going into that season, there wasn't a lot of like, watch out for this Cale Makar kid. And only as his draft year progressed did he start to shoot up the rankings. And so when the draft rolled around, like, he sure goes 1, Patrick goes 2, and they're sitting there going, okay, we're getting one of either Heiskanen or Makar, depending on who Dallas takes. And then, the rest, as they say, is history. But it was interesting how all these little things over the course of the years built up to the team that they were this season. And I just thought they were a machine, just on a mission. Like, doing that Western Conference final, seeing how they dismantled the Edmonton Oilers in 4 games. It was really remarkable. I felt going into the final, like I couldn't, because of all the things we talked about, I couldn't bet against Tampa because I got so much respect for them. But I really did feel at the same time that this was Colorado's time. And clearly it ended up being the case. So it was like, the images of Eric Johnson and Nathan McKinnon like bear hugging each other on the ice after the clock hit 0 in Tampa was really telling. I think, because Darren Helm won a cup very early in his career. Andre Burakovsky won in 2018 with Washington. Like, that was it. Like, everyone else, they were winning the Stanley Cup for the first time. So just that jubilation of going through that experience for the first time was really evident, certainly on the ice in the immediate aftermath. And as I said, I think the right team won in the end. It was neat to have kind of the 2 favorites going head to head in the final. We don't always get that. And I thought they were full value for everything they've got this year.
Yeah, Cale Makar would not be denied. And, when you're talking about the draft and you mentioned Heiskanen as well, who's somebody who could even get to that level as well. Jersey and Philly must be just kicking themselves now for not taking those guys.
Right. It's so easy to look back now. Hey, it's funny how it always works out.
Right. Yeah. But Cale, Cale Makar is one of these kind of guys that he's exactly what you want, because, there's lots of teams that draft good players, and there's dark horse players that end up being good, and then there's top end, top 10 drafted players that are good, but you never know kind of where they're going to take their game come playoffs. And that's been a knock on a lot of guys that have won cups now. Even McKinnon now winning his cup, there's definitely been chatter over the years that McKinnon's been there. Was this a guy that can get it done in the playoffs? But then along comes a guy once every few years where, he's really good in the regular season, and then you just see when playoffs roll around, they kick it to another level. And for Cale Makar being as young as he is and what he's doing, you might see another one of these types of runs like Nick Lidstrom had, where he's just winning Norris after Norris after Norris, collecting Stanley Cups along the way. I'm just so excited to see where that career is headed and how good it's going to be. And he might end up getting paid more out there than McKinnon in the end. It would be warranted. That's a guy, if he can do that back to like consistently in the playoffs, you can't ask for a better defenseman.
Right. And Cale Makar is a big fan of The Office. You remember the last episode, Andy Bernard has the line, I wish there was a way of knowing when we were in the good old days before you've actually left them. And I feel like, for this era, like we're in the good old days, right? Like McDavid's top of his game. McKinnon has won a Stanley Cup. Makar, like we're just seeing him scratch the surface and become the best. Like Crosby and Ovi are still significant players in this league. Like this is really, really cool to watch. And before long, I think Makar will be in the conversation, if he's not already, with the McDavids and the Matthews and so on, in terms of just the best flat out players in the league. And I'm with you. I would not be surprised if he had a truck full of Norris trophies by the time we're all said and done, and a few Hearts mixed in, maybe another Conn Smythe, because I don't think the Avalanche are quite done winning either.
Probably a cup or two more too.
Right.
Colorado Avalanche. Well, I was told, but my mic was not on, so do I sound a lot better now?
You
boys?
sound a lot better now.
Now
Yeah, you don't sound so far away.
Oh, so close, but so far away. Yeah, well, that's okay. I've just been taking in your guys chatting, which is great. Eric is like, I'm not trying to pump Eric's tires. Like, I know we're good friends and everything, but to me, Eric is one of the most quiet, unknown hockey minds that I'm trying to like get onto the hockey YouTube realm, anywhere, like just in general, because Eric's a referee now. He's played for a long time. And just Kyle, I'm just curious about referees. Before I have to ask this question before we get into the draft talk. I know Habs fans hopefully are being patient because we're all fired up for this draft in a couple of days here. But are you as confused as some fans are about certain calls in the NHL? Like, I mean, you got a rinkside view. Like, what are you hearing between benches? What are you hearing from refs? Like, you got to give us what can you give us, I guess, without too many four-letter words, maybe, in terms of insight about the refereeing in the playoffs and maybe even regular season too.
Yeah, I don't know. I try to tread lightly on this one just because like that's the one thing about watching the game down low, like at ice level, is just like how bleeping fast it is. And you're like, it's amazing that they get as much right as they do because of the pace that the game moves at. So, I mean, I think inevitably, and certainly in the playoffs, there's going to be heightened scrutiny when things go wrong. But I mean, you go back to one of the more hotly debated ones. I mean, the Blake Coleman, kick-in goal of the Calgary-Edmonton series. Initially, I was like, I couldn't believe that they had called it back. But then after thinking about it, like, the next day, I'm like, okay, now I understand why they called it the way they did. And I think it actually makes sense. The Makar goal, I understood it once I saw the angle of like him lifting the stick off the puck. I thought it makes sense why it got held up. And I mean, even like, John Cooper made light of the too many, what he felt was a missed too many men call in overtime of game 4 of the final. But I mean, unfortunately that happens a lot every game. Like that's just part of, again, the speed of the game with guys coming on and off the bench. That just happens. And the fact that, again, it resulted in a goal a few seconds later with Kadri ripping off the ice as quick as he did, just amplified it. But I wish I had more for you here on this one, guys. It's just it's tough to lay into. I mean, it certainly, they make mistakes, as we all do. But I think if you looked at other hockey leagues around the world, I don't think you have to watch it for too long before you realize, they're not perfect, but they are the best. So, it's good, when you have a Kelly Sutherland and a Wes McCauley and the veteran guys at the end of the year working games. Like I think hopefully most players and coaches feel that they're in good hands. But the issue I think that I do start to have is just when the standard changes, right? I know Craig Simpson on our broadcast talks about that a lot, like, because he can beautifully challenge like a player's mindset and also a coach. But in that instance, thinking like a player, where you see something early on in a game, if it's ticky-tack, a little tug on the hand or a little hack across the hand that gets called, then it's going, okay, if you're telling me that's a standard, then you need to keep it that way for the whole night. And when it kind of goes up and down and sometimes it's called and sometimes it's not, then as a player, you're going, how am I even supposed to play in this? Like, I don't know, when I go to make a check like that, am I going to get called or am I not? Because you've done both things here tonight. That's where it can really become, I think, more of an issue. But so long as there's kind of a standard set early in a hockey game and it stays that way for the duration of the night, then I think for the most part, as consumers, as people that cover it, as players, coaches, I think, we're in good hands, barring the occasional slip up that just happens with life in a game that's played at the pace that it is.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that. So yeah, when you're talking like standards I do agree that, yeah, they should call it straight the whole way, but there is an element of game management involved as well. So like I can tell you from personal experience calling games that, especially high level games, say a non-body contact league, you might let a little bit of bumping go early on in the game because, guys are really fighting hard for body position on every play. And then, it starts to get ramped up a little bit more each time. So then you start cracking down on them. And then, I do get that complaint from players and coaches a lot as well. How come we weren't calling the bumps at the beginning of the game? How come we're doing it now? And you kind of have to explain to them, yes, it's a game management thing, because if it starts getting out of hand, somebody's going to get hurt. And it's the same thing. Like obviously, when you're calling stick penalties, it should be the same across the board. A slash is a slash, a hook's a hook, a trip's a trip. But when it comes to a game management thing, as far as with the stuff that happens after the whistles, the little bits of roughing and stuff like that, you can, the best refs will let them know this is starting to get out of hand. Right. I'm going to start calling this. We're going to start changing this standard throughout the game because you guys are starting to get out of control. It's the same thing when it comes to chirping back and stuff like that, and the little unsportsmanlike plays and stuff like that. You can let a little bit of that go, but if it starts to move the game in a direction where it's not going to be good for anybody anymore, then yeah, you have to communicate. It's all about communication with your players and your coaches and everybody else, and saying like, look, sometimes I do it right at the beginning of a period. I can say, look, this period, I'm not having any more of this nonsense. So knock it off. Right. But as far as like, when you were talking about the standard in the NHL, like I've found that over the years playing, and I've played in a lot of different leagues. I've played in competitive leagues and I've played in recreational leagues. I think that a lot of people that get down on the reffing, I always kind of think it's more of an excuse. It's like, in the leagues that I played in, you can play through the refereeing. In the NHL, they tend to argue the calls and scrutinize the calls a lot more because the NHL is so tight. It is such a game that can be decided in 2 seconds flat or from one call, that they're held to a higher standard. But the people who are the fans of the game, who are watching at home from their couches, you don't understand that standard. So it's, you can't take their scrutinization as seriously as if the league is scrutinizing it. And I think that the NHL does a great job in getting the calls right. They have more ability to review calls than they've ever had in the past. And, the standard of officiating is really good. You have games where, I'm a Leaf fan, and I can tell you in a couple games where I was watching in the Tampa series that, yeah, I thought the calls aren't going the Leafs' way. That's definitely true. It's not going their way. But when you really go back and look, there's no unjustified calls. There's nothing that, you can look back on and say, oh, that wasn't a penalty, or that should have been a penalty. When you scrutinize and break it down, I think the NHL reffing is fantastic, and I think it's only getting better year after year. So, yes, they should be held to a higher scrutiny because they are the professional and the top end league. But I think that they do a great job. And, I hear a lot of these people online that want to blame refs for losses and stuff like that. You might get away with that at the NHL level a bit more, but not so much. The players coming up through the leagues before they get drafted and stuff like that. I mean, they've all dealt with the same referees night in, night out. If you're playing in the OHL or something like that, you see the same refs, and, you build a rapport with them. And, they should be used to that by now. They shouldn't, to me, it's kind of a cop out for them to go on and say, hey, the ref didn't call the game consistently from the beginning to the end, because I guarantee you that they communicated that, especially at the NHL level, throughout the entire night. They said, hey, it's starting to get out of hand. Let's draw it in, or we're going to start taking one from the scrums. They all know. And, they might say something to save face at the end of the game, but I think that they all know and understand the game management and the work that the refs have to do out there.
Yeah. Kevin Bieksa talks about it all the time when he played. Like, he would always, his first comment to the official, whoever was working the game, was always, how you doing? How are things? Right. Like, that was always the first dialogue with the referees that night, right? Like, not like, what the F was that? F you, that was brutal, right? Like, it's establish a good line of communication there, and then, move on from that. But it's an emotional game, right? And especially, as you say, at the NHL level, there's money at stake, there's jobs on the line. So you understand why at times, whether you're a player or coach, or, sitting up in the press box and you hear a GM, slamming a door or slamming the top of a table or something, just because there's a lot of impassioned feelings behind each call that's made over the course of a game, because there can be a lot at stake at times. So it's part of what makes it great, like, just how invested everyone is in it. But at times you are kind of looking at, well, are you a little over the line here? But I guess that's just life at times too.
Mm-hmm. It's something that's it's so interesting, because it just seems to, and I wasn't trying to necessarily go after the refs. I was just more saying, like, is everybody kind of on the same page as being confused about things, or is it, like, I just kind of was curious what the consensus is from the players, and maybe, stuff that we don't normally hear about. But
yeah, I thought, like, I mean, the one that I think confuses most people is probably the goalie interference reviews. But I thought, Down Goes Brown, who writes for The Athletic, did a really good kind of explainer a few months back. I think it was just before the playoffs, kind of breaking down, like, really, if you consider what the wording is within the rule book when it comes to these calls, more often than not, you can kind of get a sense of where a call is going to go when you look at a replay, if you keep those things in mind. But inevitably there's going to be some where you're going, even with that considered, I don't know how they reach that conclusion. But that's the beauty and the problem of replay, right? Like, we've kind of opened that Pandora's box, where some of the angles that we just weren't privy to before and you weren't able to tell, now you can, and create open a whole other can of worms in terms of confusion. But I think we can't, it's too late now, right? Like, we've got to live with it. So we'll see where it goes in terms of, how they want to tweak things as the years progress here.
Well, we've made fans wait, probably specifically, at least the Montreal fans that watch this channel a little while here. But Kyle, you're going to be in Montreal on Thursday and Friday, I should say. I'm not sure if it's all weekend festivities, what you got planned, but you'll be covering the NHL Draft in Montreal. And a lot of folks, we just heard today from Kent Hughes and Vinny Lecavalier, actually, how Vinny Lecavalier has had direct dialogue with Shane Wright, who is the projected first overall pick potentially for the Canadiens, although some folks really want them to take this guy right here. And some people think that the Habs are very, very quietly interested in Logan Cooley as well. So, I mean, those are the guys that Kent Hughes has verbally said as of today that the Canadiens are going to pick from one of those three. So we kind of knew that anyway. But, it just, I guess my first question will be, I know that no one knows the answer, no one has the insight, but who do you believe the Canadiens will take? And then we'll go from there.
I'm really not confident enough in saying, right? Like, I don't know, like that. And that's kind of the beauty of it. I mean, I understand that Shane Wright's been projected for a long time here to be the consensus number one pick. But, it seems like, Slafkovsky and to your point, Logan Cooley has made things kind of interesting here. And the fact that Kent Hughes, and maybe it's just gamesmanship, like it's going to be a big enough deal. The fact that, as we've all talked about, it's in Montreal, they have the first overall pick. But now that like he's leaving all the possibilities open, it was beautiful watching him today. I thought it was great. I'm going, golly, like we were in for a great week here of the draft and in Montreal. Like, gosh, would they consider trading the first overall pick? Sounds like he hasn't closed the door on that. Does he try to get 2 picks within the top 3, the top 5? Sounds like that's in play too. So it could be just absolutely thrilling if you're a Montreal fan in terms of what could potentially happen here early on in the first round of the draft come Thursday night at Centre Bell. So I love that he's kind of gone about that route and just leaving the different possibilities open. I just thought it was really interesting. One thing he said today, where he said, I understand that there's a great deal of pressure that can come with somebody in Shane Wright's position, where like every shift it seemed like of his this season was being broken down and analyzed, and it's a little lazy here, and not quite hard enough here, and and he said it's one thing to have to deal with that, and certainly you can understand that it's not an easy thing to go through, but he also put in if you're taken first overall by the Montreal Canadiens, that could create way more pressure than anything you've had to go through up until this point of your playing career. And I don't believe that was a direct kind of comment towards with how Shane Wright handled things, because did he put up maybe as many points as some expected? No, I still thought he had a pretty good year offensively, but I just thought it was interesting as they kind of weigh all the factors of who they ultimately want to select if they do use that first overall pick, which I think they will. That much I can say confidently, is that they will pick someone at 1 on Thursday. But as you're projecting, how is this person going to be able to play 3-5 years down the road at the NHL level? You're also wondering how he's going to handle all this of being a first overall selection by the Montreal Canadiens and the scrutiny that'll inevitably come with that, whether you're playing well or struggling. It's all just a fascinating conversation to be had here. One thing for us to do it, but within their boardroom as they try to make their decision, I imagine the talks will continue, right up until they arrive at their draft table on Thursday afternoon.
Well, here's a picture of you with some prospects, including on
there
the
they
far
are.
right.
How about the hair down there? Like from Matthew Savoy, Connor Geekie had the best. Cutter Gauthier was dressed to the nines, and even Shane Wright had the nice flow. He had the drawstring suit pants going there too, you can see, in lieu of a belt. It was very, very fashionable for all those guys. And yeah, as I said, the flow was just immaculate amongst the 4 of them.
Well, they had to keep up to us.
Yeah, no.
Okay,
no, I felt that. Yeah, I was riding their coattails that one. It was fun.
Well, I mean, we could talk to you for years, I'm sure. But before we go, and I think I probably could have a million more draft questions, but you know what? For the hockey fans out there, I guess you mentioned Geekie, who's somebody who fans were really high on that might go a little later in the draft, maybe within the top 10 or just after it. Any surprises that you might expect, like other than just the Canadians here? Because of course, yes, I'm biased and I'm excited about it, but what do you expect from the experience of covering the draft? Just from your reporter perspective, you're going to get to talk to a lot of these guys just after being drafted. So just tell us what you're looking forward to, I guess, from an overall perspective for the weekend in Montreal.
Well, I gotta tell you, so this is my first draft that I will have ever covered in person. I've never been to one before. So I'm kind of going in, eyes wide open and just hoping to take it all in. And I will say, so I'm going to be in a little bit of a different role this year, kind of in the crowd, I think, where, a lot of the families and stuff will be stationed as kids are being taken. So Carolyn Cameron will actually be interviewing the players and such after they're picked, and go and take their picture on the stage and such with their new jersey and team. Gotcha. So that stuff I won't be doing, but so in terms of what to expect, I'm not too sure, only because I haven't gone through it before. So it'll be, as I said, a bit of a different experience for me. The fact that, there's 8 teams right now that don't have a pick in the first round. I wonder, if any of them go about, trying to find their way in, if there's somebody they think is kind of a sleeper pick, because again, I think we're still coming out of the last couple of years where development has been hard to come by because of the shutdowns and leagues not playing games. So are there some teams that maybe feel they got a better read on a player than others, and are they willing to maybe move some things around to try to move up or maybe even move back because they feel they know somebody that others don't? That part to me will kind of be the most interesting, I think, as we progress after, Montreal, of course, decides how they want to stick handle their first pick, and if they try to get another one early on within the first 5, or what ultimately they can pull off there if there's a deal to be made.
Well, I'm certainly all ears for it. I can tell you that right now. I can't wait to see what, this first draft for this new Habs brass produces. I mean, I'm as selfishly, yes, I am looking forward to it a lot. I want to bring up a couple viewer questions. I think it was just a couple that came in from my little YouTube post that I did. And one here from Jordan: what is your number one behind the scenes memory from your career as a sports reporter?
Oh, that's really good. You know what? Okay.
Go ahead. Talk about first, but I want to add to that.
Sure. I think behind the scenes, I think you do get a chance to witness some stuff that that the typical fan doesn't, just because your credential is able to take your places that just a regular ticket to the game doesn't, and I'm very, very fortunate for that. But honestly, for me, like at the end of the playoffs, when it's all said and done, and being able to be with your group that you've done games with all year, and just kind of enjoy a moment, and everyone kind of nod at each other, and whether it's a hug, a high five, whatever it is, and just say great season. That's a really rewarding feeling, because I think you do develop a real good relationship with the people that you work with, and because you're all kind of working towards the same thing of trying to put on a good show every week, and then the grind of 2 months in the playoffs, and then finally reach the finish line. It's not quite like the euphoria of celebrating an actual Stanley Cup win, but it is a pretty nice feeling just to know that you got through the year, and you did everything you could to try to provide entertaining, whatever it was, interviews, content for the viewer and for the show. That's something that I always look forward to, is just those moments with the other commentators or production people or technical staff that all put all the work in making our shows happen throughout the season. I look forward to that every year.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask as well, coming from knowing what you're able to do, and when it comes to interviewing players, especially post game or even pre-game, I mean, we've all seen, and it's fun for TSN to throw up a top 10 video on it. Sometimes some unfavorable interactions with sports reporters in the rooms, and I'm just curious, as a layperson, is the etiquette in a dressing room when you're talking to these guys, or even the code of conduct, as it were, is that a static thing? Are you guys told, look, stick strictly to these types of questions, you're not allowed to ask these types of things? I know basically that a lot of them are coached in how they answer questions as well. Mm-hmm. But I'm just curious, when we see the things like that get out of hand, there's a certain reporter, I won't bring up his name, has been covering the Leafs for years, who it blows my mind that he's ever even still allowed in the dressing room for some of the stuff that he asks. And I'm just curious if that's something where you're given a wide breadth of what you're allowed to ask them, or is it very, stick to these things?
You know what, if it's a scrum or press conference style, there's never a, hey, no asking about this, no asking about that. I mean, if there's a question that's asked that, whoever's being interviewed doesn't want to answer, they can say no comment, or leave it, or answer it. Whatever they want to do, that's up to them. But that's left open. I mean, for our broadcast interviews, it's a little bit different, just because, as Sportsnet, you're a partner with the NHL. So it's a bit of a different relationship in those settings. So, you'd never want to put, a player or a coach in a situation where you're trying to make them look bad. Not that you would in any type of scenario, or I wouldn't anyways, or just create an uncomfortable moment. If there's ever a question, that was maybe a little off the beaten path, because typically, for us, if it's, an interview a couple hours before the game, if it's at the bench during warm-up, intermission, whatever, they've got a pretty good idea that, it'll be there's 5 or 6 categories that I can go down, right? And it's usually all hockey driven. So if I have something a little different that I'm thinking of that we'd like to do just to mix it up, or whatever the case may be, then in those cases, whether it's, to the PR person beforehand or to the player just as they come out before the interview begins, like just briefing them on and saying, hey, I would like to ask you about A, B, and C, just as a heads up, right? And so just so they can have a bit of time to almost digest that. And then hopefully when the interview starts, then you get a better answer as opposed to just, almost surprising them with something that maybe they weren't expecting. And then they're caught a little off guard. And what they end up saying maybe isn't as concise or as clear as it could have been if you just beforehand said, hey, I'm thinking about asking you about this,
So do you think that yields better results then?
I think so.
If they know beforehand, as opposed to
in some cases
put them on the spot.
In some cases, yes, Eric. And then there's certainly times where you can put them on the spot if you think it could be, something a little more quirky or fun, and just try to get, more of, again, a positive, more fun reaction. And it would certainly never want to do something where you're putting them in a negative light. But there are times where, again, you leave it and you kind of act as, have it as a surprise at the end. But for stuff that maybe requires a little more of a well thought answer and a little more thinking behind, what the person may want to say, that's when, you maybe bring it up just beforehand, because you want to put them in the best position possible to give a good answer.
I imagine that helps out your career as well. Like if you're going to be somebody that's going to be welcomed into these situations, moving forward, that, because you can always tell if you watch, like I've watched you interview people for years, ever since you've been doing it. And, you can tell that a lot of the players have a lot more of a positive attitude towards you, as opposed to in the past, some of the people that I've seen, I went through all of the bad eras with the Leafs right from the late 90s on. The early 90s was a good era for them, but like watching Kessel and Phaneuf in the dressing rooms and stuff like that. And the tough relationships that they had. Sometimes, they come out even in a game that they were winning, or when there's positive stuff going on in the game, you can tell that they just want to get away from the reporter as fast as possible. Short answers, nothing, right? But I imagine that doing that method of, preparing them probably helps out with their response to you too.
That's the hope. It never goes perfect, right? You can never totally predict what's going to happen, but yeah, you try to put the whole setup in the best situation possible. So like one example, again, just to give you one quickly, I remember the 2018 playoffs, the day of Game 6 of Toronto-Boston. That was the same day that the guy in the van up in north of the city went on the rampage and killed a number of people. And so that was like that afternoon. And so that was like, we had a bench interview with Ron Hainsey. And so that was like, probably an hour before warmups, we went to their PR and said, hey, we just thinking about, as a question to him in that moment, saying like, hey, is there anything you'd like to say on behalf of the Toronto Maple Leafs, just to kind of speak to that and give that moment its respect, rather than just pretend that nothing's going on and we're just playing hockey here. And so that's the type of thing where you could do that a little bit beforehand. And, he gave a beautifully emotional answer at the time. And so that's why you do it, stuff like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right. Sure. Yeah. So.
And the same thing. I remember a lot of that stuff in Vegas as well. After the show, right. It was right after they just started their new team. I was doing a different show at the time, and we were talking about it on the show. And I was watching the games after and stuff like that, and just having the. I think it's funny because you watch like a lot of interviews about the game with the players, and their answers seem very mechanical. But then when you have an outside force that causes them to have more emotional moments like that, and you can really humanize players a lot more, like, so we don't see them as robots as much. I think that helps the game, and we should continue to do that. I mean, you should continue to do that. I probably never get in that role, but it's a good idea to see them at a more human level. Not always the only real human level you usually see them at is when they get upset. You see that more often than with other things. And I think it's just nice to see that they, they do lots of stuff before the games and stuff like that, with special people and stuff like that they bring out. And that's really cool to see. But it's good to see it in the interviews too. I think they should continue doing that.
Agreed.
Well, Highland Park, we should mention, unfortunately, here we are, guys, and there was another shooting today in Illinois. So our hearts do go out to the folks out there. And, you brought it up, and I'm just like, I can't not say anything now. I feel like it's just that phrase, another one comes to mind, and it's just awful. But 6 people have perished and more are injured. So just wanted to mention that, as it's not a great way to want to end this interview. And we will ask you one more question from a viewer here, Kyle. So anyway, just wanted to say that just for those folks out there that were thinking about them. So
of course.
And did you ever have, this is right on point with what we were just talking about, a negative interaction with an athlete when interviewing them? Now, Kyle, I do have this here because to me, this is where you shine. And I forgive me for putting this jerk on the screen, but okay. But this was what your colleagues called a broadcasting or a career defining moment for you in your interview with Brad. And I know it's a long time ago now, but everybody had your back after that happened with him. But you know what? I will say before you jump in here, he gave one-word answers to every single reporter in the locker room after talking to you, Kyle. So, I mean, that was a question from a viewer, and I knew the answer kind of, and I thought this one might come to mind.
Yeah, and I mean, he's not a jerk by any stretch. I mean, I understand why fans of other teams may not love him. I get it. But it was that was an interesting thing to kind of go through. But I mean, that was in terms of the grand scheme of things, like him giving one-word answers, it was like, wow, big deal. And you're right. And then he did the same thing with the regular media, the other media, I should say, in the scrum and the dressing room after the fact. But it was funny. So on trade deadline, I was on with you guys or with you, Drew, and some of your co-hosts on trade deadline day this year. And then that night, Montreal was playing Boston in Montreal. And we were doing that game, and I hadn't interviewed Marchand since that moment there in the 2019 playoffs, just because, I mean, we're in a pandemic. We didn't see any of Boston last year because it was a Canadian division, and just the way the schedule lined up, I hadn't had a chance to talk to him since. And so the game goes in overtime. In my mind, I'm already thinking, I'm like, Marchand's going to score here, because usually as a post-game walk-off interview after an overtime game, you get whoever scores the winner. And I'm like, of course he's going to score here, and he does. And so I'm like, all right, let's do this. And so I go over to the Boston Hall, and I said, Marchand, please. The PR guy's like, yep, no problem. And so he comes out, and he's like, hey, it looks at me, hey, how's it going? I'm like, good, how are you doing? Yeah, good. And so we're talking just about, because they hadn't played in that building, I think, since the pandemic, right? And it's always such a good crowd whenever Boston rolls into town. And he played to the crowd beautifully again that night. And so I was just, you're making small talk as cameras getting set and our trucks getting ready to record on the interview. And so we're just going back and forth. And then a light goes out, and I was like, what? And so we're trying to get that back up. And so that comes back on. Okay, we're good. And then we're like ready to go. And honestly, guys, this has never happened. I haven't been around for that long. This has never happened to me before in my career. Our camera goes down. I'm like, what? We're like, our camera's down. And so, camera guy, God love him, is trying to get it fired up again. And so now, like, there is, I think if you canvas, the men and women and do, the role that I do in their respective markets or at their respective networks, I think there's no worse feeling than having an athlete standing next to you, ready to do the interview, and there's some sort of delay, whatever it is, technical, the truck's still trying to get off the air, so they can't do the interview yet, whatever the issue. And you're just standing there, and it's agonizing because the athlete wants to get it over with, and you just want to go. And whatever the silence in between feels like it's forever. So now our camera's down, and I'm like, oh my God. So I'm trying to make small talk and be like, because it was the deadline. So I'm asking them about that. Like they just traded for Hampus Lindholm that weekend from Anaheim. So I'm asking them about that. And to his credit, he was like the most patient you could ask anybody in that situation to be, and then some. Like he was more than okay. And our producer says in my ear, we're gonna give it 15 more seconds to see if the camera fires. Otherwise, we're gonna have to cancel the interview. And so I said, hey, we're just gonna give a few more seconds here to see if the camera fires up again. And it doesn't. So we're going, sorry, we've got to cancel the interview. And I'm like, sorry, man. I was like, camera's not working. I was like, we can't do this thing. And even like Marchand's going, he goes, oh, okay. He goes, well, I could come back and just take my skates off and come back. I was like, no, I said, you're good. I appreciate that. But like, who knows? The camera may never turn on again tonight. So we've already wasted your time once. We don't want to do it a second time. But I was chuckling myself afterwards just because I never had that happen before. And if it happened in that moment of all moments, it was like, geez, it was almost a message from the hockey gods saying that, they just weren't quite ready for the reunion yet between the two of us. So
that is a story. I did not know that story.
It would have been funny if, like, as soon as you asked him about that, if you just leaned in and went, no comment.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
because it would have, it would have started some stuff. Ooh, Kyle doesn't like Brad Marchand.
No, right, exactly, like that, and that's not the case at all. I have zero problems with him.
I imagine he's a great guy, like off the rink.
Well, it's funny, like, and again, I don't know him particularly well, just because I don't cover Boston, and you don't see them too often. Did a couple playoff series with them, but I don't know him particularly well outside of like just that kind of interview setting. But like, talk to anyone that has been or is his teammate in Boston. I think they would all speak incredibly high of him. So he's a great teammate, but he does a wonderful job, getting under everyone else's skin, and you can't fault him for that. Yes, he's crossed the line at times, but I think he's just he's a world-class player that has become very entertaining to watch.
If you could interview anybody, past to future, who would it be, and why John Tortorella?
I've interviewed John Tortorella.
That's who I would want. That's only why I threw that in.
Yeah. No, when that Columbus Boston series, I interviewed him a few times because he was coaching the Jackets at that time, and it was amazing because we would have the broadcasters that have the rights to the games in the playoffs. They have their own little chat with the head coach on the mornings on game days, and so usually coaches would do the regular media and then come and do the broadcaster chat afterwards. And for whatever reason, he liked to do it before. So he would do his chat, and I remember being so blown away because he was like so engaging with us. It was just like the side of John Tortorella that you would never see watching on TV and the interviews that he does in those settings. And I was like, who is this guy? And he's like, animated and whatever you wanted to ask, and he'd give you real detailed explanations. And then he'd walk like 15 feet to the right up to the podium and just shut it all right off. It was unbelievable. He was back to regular Torts that we all know and loved. So
nice.
That was a.
But who's would your
for sure? Probably, I would say Paul Kariya, just because he was my favorite player, and I had the great fortune of meeting him once, and I did like a phone interview with him just for like some background before a hockey night game a couple years ago. But to do like an actual television interview with him when he was a player, that would be a real thrill because he was my hero growing up.
Nice.
Well, your first NHL game you ever saw, Kyle. You want to tell that story really quickly about Paul Kariya?
Yes. Yeah. Great. I apologize for throwing my dad under the bus here, but yeah, well, we went, cause I grew up on Vancouver Island. So we went to a game in Vancouver when Anaheim came through town, and it was like late March. I think like Anaheim was kind of in the mix for maybe grabbing like the 8th spot. But they needed to like really get on a run, and like Vancouver, I think was terrible that year. And so anyway, so it was my first ever NHL game, miss school, go over and get to watch the game. So we stayed at the Sandman Hotel in downtown Vancouver, and maybe this was an omen for what was to come that night. And we go to get in the elevator, go up to our room, and the doors close, and then the elevator doesn't move, and the doors wouldn't open again. So we were like, my dad and I were like stuck in there for 15 minutes as they're trying to get the elevator doors open again. So that was like the beginning of the night.
As a maintenance guy during my day job, I can tell you that happens frequently.
Right. But at that time in my life, I hadn't had that happen before. So I'm like, uh-oh. And then we go to the game, and Vancouver scored in the first. So it was 1-0 Vancouver after the first period. And, partway through the intermission, we're like, all right, so we went to go do a bathroom break. And we're just coming back as like the players are coming back out for the second period. But so of course at this time in the intermission, like the lines at the concession stands have dwindled. So my dad's going like, let's get something now. The lines are short. And then we don't have to worry about going and missing any more of the game. And so I'm like, all right, yeah, let's do that. So I can't remember what we got, but snacks. And I remember like, as we're walking back to our seats, like there was like a reaction in the building. Certainly Vancouver hadn't scored, but there was like commotion. And so then we get back to our seats and sit down. And then I noticed like on the Jumbotron, it's now 1-1. And I was like, oh my God, Anaheim scored. And then they announced the goal, and it was like Paul Kariya from Teemu Selanne and Steve Rooch. And I'm like, oh my God, like the guy I came to see here scored and I missed it. Anyway, and then Vancouver went on to win 8-1 that game. And I saw all 8 Vancouver goals. And I remember like at one point, like when they made it 6-1, like my dad, who had stayed seated the entire night, stood up and started applauding. And I just remember looking at him with just such heartbreak. And I felt that he had betrayed me like in every way. I'm like, you're really clapping at 6-1 now? Like you stayed quiet this entire night, and now you're choosing to get up when I am in such pain and agony watching this go on in front of me. Anyway, and so up until this April, I had never seen that goal because I remember turning the highlights on the next morning. I'm not going to show the lone Anaheim goal in the Vancouver market of an 8-1 Canucks win on the morning loop the next day. So I never saw it there. Never saw it for years. I remember when I first got to sports, I remember asking like archives, like any chance there's this goal floating around, and they couldn't find it. And then when we did hometown hockey in Campbell River in April, I told that story on the air, and somehow they went and found it, and they rolled it in as we were going to break, and my dad was there, which was really special. So we got to watch the goal together for the first time together. 22 years later, which was really, really neat. So it was worth the wait to see it. It wasn't that nice of a goal. Like he scored way nicer goals over his career. But to be able to finally see it, it made the other 8 Vancouver goals that night a little more digestible.
Oh man, you're so full of stories, and they're all fun. Well, I think you gave us over an hour, which knowing your and I's phone calls from when I first ever talked to you.
Yeah, this is short.
Yeah,
no questions about the hair either. Like we're just gonna gloss right by that.
Well,
yes.
You know what?
We should talk about your flow more, Eric, than mine.
It's getting there.
That's the longest Eric's hair has ever been.
No.
No?
Oh no, it's not, is it?
When I was in my early 20s, it was all the way down my back. That's back when I wanted to be a rock star, not a hockey player.
Oh, great.
Well, there you have it, folks. Well, Kyle, thank you a million as always, and we appreciate the stories, we appreciate the insight, and just you being here, man. Ever since I saw you pop up, I think it was a hit before a Montreal game. I saw you were 21, looking as young as you still pretty much do, anyway. And I thought, hey, maybe I could do this too. Anyway, but here we are, man, and just great to bring Eric on as well, and have this great chat. So we'll have to do this again sometime.
You bet. All right. This was fun to be on with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's Kyle Bukauskas, Eric, myself. Thanks for watching, everybody. And you know what to do if you like the show. You know what buttons to push is what I always say now. So thanks for watching, folks. And we'll see you on the next one.